Hello and welcome back to the Django DRF and React series. So far, we have built a RESTful API with Django and React in this series. We've looked at permissions, view sets, routers. We've implemented JWT, and then we've looked through the API schema and documentation, how to generate some documentation for our API, which can be useful when developing. And in the previous tutorial, we looked at filters and building a simple search facility within React. So if you're interested in any of that before you move on to this tutorial, then please head across to the Learn Django Rest Framework series here, and you'll be able to see all the different sections and tutorials so far. So this is part 7. So welcome to part 7 of the Django DRF series. In this tutorial, we're developing a simple CRUD system: create, return, update, and delete. So what you're looking at here is the React front end, and this is using the data from the Django backend, the Django DRF service. So you can see that we've got a home page. If you're familiar with this, we've got a home page, and we can drill down to individual posts. So in this tutorial, we're going to eventually build up in React a admin area similar to this, where we can click on new post, create a new post, and then you can see we've created a new post. Obviously that should then appear on the front page. So we then have the ability to then edit. So we go through a simple editing feature. So there we go. And then we got the ability to delete as well. So that's CRUD, create, return, update, and delete. So as you might imagine, this tutorial is going to be in 2 sections. First of all, we'll head over to Django and build the views and the URLs to handle the CRUD requests from the React application. And then we'll head over to React and then build up the components and interfaces so that we can actually then perform the updates or the deletions or the creation of new posts. So we're back in the Django code here. You can see that we're in the blog API and the views. Like I said, the code is in the description. Now we had in the previous tutorial started to generate a lot of bloat in terms of code. So what I've done in this tutorial, I've just gone ahead and just slimmed down and refactored some of the code just to make it a little bit neater and tidier. You can see we've got now some views for the post detail and post list. So that will list out the individual item. Sorry, post list will list out all the items. That's what you see on the front page of React. And then we got the post detail to showcase or to show the individual item. And then previous tutorial, we looked at search, whereby we generate a very simple search facility using filters here. And we use the filters search filter to extract or to utilize a search field with starts with to extract data from the database and return on the React front end. So you can see that I've tidied it up. I've taken out a lot of the other code here. I've left the view classes just as a reminder when we build some new classes. So we are using generic classes here. Maybe at the end of the tutorial, we'll go through some other methods we can utilize, but we'll keep this nice and simple. So first thing we're going to need is a view to create a new post. So a lot of this code is going to be replicated, which suggests that we need to be working in a different way, but we are just going to go through some of the generic classes here. So we're going to use the create API view to create posts. That seems like a good way of working. On all the views that we have here, we're going to be utilizing is authenticated. So you have to be logged into the system to perform any of these CRUD functions. Now we're going to use the query set of the posts all the time, and the serializer is just going to be the same every time. We're utilizing this generic serializer here. You can see that we're just collecting all the data from the post. Now, if you're wondering where the post table is, it's in this model in the blog. So this is our table that we're referring to here with the different post items. So let me just remove those. Okay, so now we've got our simple view for creating a post. That's pretty much all we're going to need there. So we now need to detail posts. So when you go to the admin page, you'll notice that we can view all the items here. So we're going to need a view for that. So we've just got retrieve view for this. So again, what we've done here is we've just utilized permissions, the query set and the serializer. And now we're going to need the edit post. So let's have a look at this. So we see we're using the update API this time. If you're not too sure what these are, I tried to leave them here so it gives you an idea if you can't remember or have not seen these before. So here we're going to be utilizing the update reviews, which is used for update only endpoints for a single model instance. So that seems like a good use of this. So this is how we're going to edit. So all we need again is the permissions, the serializer, and the query set, and then delete. So we're going to need to be able to delete items. So we use the retrieve destroy API again, used for read and update endpoints, represent a single model instance. Okay, so we're going to utilize that to delete items. And again, it's the same situation. Notice that we've pretty much copied the code down on every single view, which, like I said, does suggest that this probably isn't the most, or isn't the only way we can do this. Of course, it isn't the only way that we can do this, but suggesting that there's a lot of code reuse here. So we're probably going to need to refactor this at some point. But let's just go with this for now. So now we're going to need 4 new endpoints in our system. So we'll go over to the URLs and add some URLs. So again, I've tidied this up also. We're now, that's just a few things that I've deleted. We don't need them at the moment regarding routers and view sets, etc. Like I said, we return to view sets and routers and apply that within our system in a later tutorial. But we're just going to head across, or we're just going to keep using URL patterns for now. So let's add some new URLs. We're going to need a URL here for create. So we're going to use the prefix of admin for this and then create. So that's obviously pointing to my create post view. And obviously I've added them up here in the views here. We'll just toggle that so you can see that I've added all the different views that I'm going to need. And I'll do the same again with the admin edit post detail. So this is the edit path here. You'll notice that I'm using an integer here to determine which post I'm actually making an edit on. So that's going to be needed. So that's going to be passed in. Let's have a look at this admin post detail. So the admin post detail, notice I don't mention anything about the extra attributes or arguments that I'm passing in. This is just going to be automatically, automatically post detail, automatically sorted for me. So I don't need to worry about that at all. So I did make a mistake earlier in actual fact. So this view here, just to make it super clear, before we edit the post, we need to show the post. Now, edit the post, we can use get with the update API view, but I've just separated that. So I've made a separate view here just for collecting the data before you edit it. So that's what this view is for. So we collect the data on the editing page, and then when we finished editing, we fire off a request here to the update. So that's currently how it's set up. Again, it's not optimal, but that's how we're working at the moment. So you can see we're passing over a primary key, or we're sending across an integer, which is going to be the reference point to tell the system what post we're working on. Okay, so we've got that, and then we move across, and then we got the edit post. So the same situation again. When we fire off, when we save our new edit, what's going to happen is that we're going to send across the ID of the post that we're working on, so then that post can be updated. So if we have a look at the edit post here, you can see again, we're just using the update API. So as long as we're sending the right request, then, which we'll talk about shortly, then the ID is going to then be placed into here in the arguments, and then that's going to be utilized to update that particular post. Okay, so that's going to be needed there. And then finally, we have delete. So again, the system is going to need to know what post we want to delete. So we send across the post ID, and then in the delete post down here, this behind the scenes will take that argument and delete that specific post related to that post ID. So we need to take in data in there to identify what posts we want to delete. So there we go. So I'll reference back to Django, but that's essentially all that we're going to develop here in Django for the CRUD system. Again, I emphasize this is just going to be an intro CRUD session. We could, of course, go into the views and think about different authentication that you might need. Now, at the moment, there's no need for me to configure this because I don't really have any project specifications here. I'm just building as we go along. But of course, you may have admin users and editors, and they require different permissions, for example. You might have admin users, editors, and normal users. And obviously, you don't want normal users who are logged in to edit posts, etc. So your permissions might change depending upon what users you have. Now, we are working towards that. A later tutorial, we will have tiers of users. So we'll set up different users and then we'll set up the permissions for that. But of course, you can go ahead and have a look at that. We have covered the permissions or some of the permissions in the previous tutorial. So by all means, start to apply that. Right, so now we're in React. So first thing, again, I've just tidied up things here in React from the previous tutorial, utilizing some folders here in my components. So the post components, you can see I've got the post search single. That's just going to display all the posts. And then I've got the auth now. So register, logout, and login component are there in the auth folder. And in this tutorial, we're now going to build 4 more components: create, delete, edit, and post. So go ahead and do that if you like. And then in addition to that, we're going to need to hook this up to the router. So go ahead and navigate to the index.js file. So here I brought in the new files. So the admin, I've made a new admin app right here. So you can go ahead and do that. And then we've got the create. In admin, we've got create, delete, edit, and post. So create, edit, and delete. And the post is going to be referred to in a different way. It's going to be utilized in a wrapper. So that's how that's going to be displayed. Once you've imported in the different components, you can see here we've set out some new paths. So we've got the admin path, the create path, so the admin create path, that's going to allow us to create new posts. And this is being connected up, obviously, to these different components right here, you can see. And then the edit and delete, these are going to take in a parameter. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pass a parameter over to this component and then use that parameter as part of the request to Django, to our DRF service, to generate and collect the specified post that we want to either edit or delete. So that's stage 1. First of all, create all your files and then create the routes and imports. So now we can go over to the individual pages and now have a look at this, how this works. So let's first of all build up the admin component. Now I've already pre-written this just to make things a little bit easier. I'll just do a little bit more explaining line by line, but you can see here we're importing the use effect, use state, use context isn't being utilized, so I can remove that. So anything grayed out here means that we're not utilizing it, so we can remove it. And we import the app CSS if we need that. So you can bring in some CSS if you want to. And then here what we're going to do is import from components the admin posts. Now this is the page that's going to display all of the items that's returned from the database. So if you remember, I gave you the view. We go back to our blog here in our admin. So this is what we're going to be building. So this is the posts component. That's what you're looking at. So when we go to the admin page, it's going to load the post component. So that's what we bring in there. And then also, if you looked at the previous tutorials, we utilized a wrapper around posts. So we've got this wrapper here called post loading. And I'm actually getting that from the post section here. I'm just going to use the same component again. So what's happening here on this page, on this admin page, when I go to the admin link, this page is being generated or utilized. So you can see what's happening here is that first of all, I load in the post component. Okay, into post loading. Then I create a state. So this state here is going to include two items, loading and post. So all the posts are going to be put into the post here. So we collect all the posts from a database and we'll put it into this value here. Now loading true. So what we want to have, or this is just an example of, if we go to this page and the page is still loading data, it's going to display a message. So what we're doing is we're wrapping the post component here inside of this post loading component. So in the admin here, a bit further down, you can see that we're trying to collect all the data from, in this case, the default location. So if I go back into Django, we can see that in the blog API URLs, you can see that the root directory, which is just /API, remember, that's just going to utilize the post list, which is going to collect all the data from a database, all of it. So we return that here. And what we do is we update the loading to false, and then all the posts is going to have all the data that's been returned. So we return the data as res, and then we create a new variable called all posts, and then we get the data that's being returned, and then we put that inside of our state. So now it's inside of our state. Now, if we don't get the data returned from a database, then loading is still going to equal true. Just remember that. So down here, you can see that what we return is the actual component, the post loading component. So now we're inside this post loading component. You notice that we moved the data across via props here. And then if is loading equals true, then we're going to display this piece of text here. So if we're still waiting from the data to come back from Django, that's what it's going to be. That's what's going to be displayed. If not, then we're going to display our post component. Okay, so that's what's happening. So now we're inside of the post component. So you can see inside of the post component here, just for time, I've already pre-coded this. So you can see what we're doing here is we're bringing in React, and all these items here, this is just to do with the styling, the material UI. So here we're using material UI, which has already been loaded into the system in the previous tutorial. So if you're not too sure how to load that up, just go to the Material UI website. If you go down to the commands here, there are some, this is how to install Material UI, icons at least, because you're going to need the icons as well. So let's just go back to posts. So that's what I'm using there for styling. And this is just an extension of that styling. I'm just overriding some of the Material UI items. So next up then, we have some props here. So const props equals props. So what we're passed across is the posts. So what we're going to do is basically just collect the posts from the props. And basically now what we have is that all the data that's been returned previously from the admin component is now being passed here. So what I have now here is all the data that's been returned from a database. So I can reference that now to check, first of all, to see if there's any data that's being returned. If there isn't, it's just going to display a message. And then we're going to return the actual table on the screen. So this table, again, is just a Material UI component. So what we have here is a container. This is just going to contain the page to a certain size. I've selected MD, which is a reference to a particular width. So this is going to be a center-lined container of a particular width. If I can change that to XL, that'd be a smaller width. If I can change it to large, and so on. So I've selected small in this case. And then we've got the paper that's just going to wrap around everything so that we can change some of the styling if we want to. Just a kind of generic container, which we can change. And then we have the table. So to build a table in Material UI, we start off with a table container, and then we have a table. So that's another container that we utilize. And then within here, we then have the head. So the head section is the column that we use at the top of the table, where we specify the different columns, headings. So here we got column headings. So we use table row and then table cell. So we've got ID, category, title, and action. So those are the 4 things that we're going to utilize here to display in our table. So what we do here, we now go to the table body, and then we're running a loop. So this is a loop, post.map post. So remember, all our data is in this variable called posts up here. So what we have now is ability to use map, and then we're going to basically just loop round and loop out that data. So for every instance, for every object there is inside of this data, we're going to loop this piece of code here. So you might already understand that what we're going to need to loop out is all the data that corresponds to these different categories, these different columns. So the first column is ID. So therefore we create a table cell and output post.id. So notice what we're doing is we're mapping our posts to post. So for every time we loop through post, we're going to reference to it as the word post. This is why we're using post and then whatever data we want to collect, in this case the ID. And then we want to output the title, and then we want to output, so we've got ID and title. So we've got ID, where's category? Somewhere we've got category, here we go, table cell category, and then we've got title, and then next up we have an area called actions. So this is actions where we specified where we can go to the edit page and the delete page or component. So here we created a link. So we use the Material UI link. And then you can see here what we've done is we set up the link to admin edit and then plus ID. So the plus ID represents that extra value, that extra argument that we're going to add on to the link to display the number. So take, for example, not entirely sure what's happened there, but that's not good. I think I've changed that. So when we click on edit, that you can see that we've got this number here. So that number is going to be utilized to find the individual post page. So if I just go back into the index, you can see here that what we're doing is we're passing that across as ID. And you'll see in a minute that we utilize that key here, or that reference point, to collect that data. So this data here, the number 4. So let's just go back into the posts in admin. So at the bottom here, you can see that these are icons. So you need to import the icon and then use it as such. So up the top here, you can see that I've got the edit icon from Material UI. So that's how you would then reference it and utilize an icon in Material UI. So we've got this link. We've just got the icon. So we've got the link wrapping around the icon to make a link, and that's where we're going to send the user to. And we do the same thing again for the delete. We're going to use the post ID to generate the deletion. So for every item in that list, it will have a different ID. So down the bottom here, you can see that's number 4 and that's number 6 in the link down the bottom here on the left-hand side. And the same with delete. You can see that's taken us to delete/4 and that's taken us to delete/6, representing the individual post. So the last thing we did in this table is just add a new table row, and this is outside of the loop. So we put this table outside of the loop, and you can see what we've got here is a link to admin create page, and then this is just called new post. So we've added a button in there. There's basically a button here that's going to be aligned on the right-hand side, which is just going to say new post, and that's going to take us to creating a new post. Okay, so that pretty much makes up the page for this. So this is going to be a simple table container, and that's what you're looking at here. So that's what we've just built. So now what we need to do is go across to the edit page here. We'll do the edit page. We'll do the create page first. So this page, This is linked to the create component. So just make sure that you've created a new component called create and you've linked it up in the index. So let's have a look at the create. So if you've been following the series, this should make, this is just going to be a copy and paste. And then we're just going to make a few changes here from other components that we've already built. Because really all we're doing here is we're just going to take in data from a form like we did with the login page, for example, or the register page. And then we're just going to handle that submit. So in this case, our handle submission will be to send it to the right endpoint in Django. So obviously we want to send it to the admin create Django endpoint because that's where we're sending the data, right? So let's go from the top here. So you can see that we've imported the material UI. Here we're using the view state, the Axios instance, and we're also using history. So this is going to give us the option of creating a redirect, because here we're going to create a new post and then we're just going to redirect the user to wherever we want to redirect them to. So again, if you see this styles here, this is just overriding material UI. That's for that. And now we've got this function here. So this piece of code here has been, this is going to slugify our title. This piece of code here that's been generated here by Matt takes our string and then formats it into a URL friendly piece of code. So obviously in our URL, what we can't do is obviously use capitals and spaces, etc., etc. But what we want to do is create a slug from our title. So our title might be called title, hello, this is a title, etc. Now the spaces obviously. So what slugify is going to do here, this piece of code, is if you're not familiar with slugifying things, it's going to add dashes when there's spaces, for example. It's going to take uppercases and make it lowercase. So this piece of code here is basically just going to generate a slug for us. So if you remember, I gave you an example. It's from this page here, from the Medium page here. So if you remember, if we go back into our create here, when we add a new title, this automatically creates a slug down here. So we're going to hook that piece of code up to generate our slug. So notice if I use capitals, it goes to lowercase and so on. So this is what that code does. So I've added it here. We're going to reference to it via slugify. So we bring that piece of code in and then we set out the history. And then we also set out the items that we want to store, the data we want to store here. So when someone types in something into our form, it's going to be saved here in our state. So this is our state. This is how we're going to manage it right there. So we've got form data and update form data, and then we reference the state or the details here via the initial form data. Okay, so we've got 4 items that we want to utilize. Now let's just go back into Django. So in our Django project, remember, if we go over to project and docs, we can then see what data it is that we need to actually define. So we want to create some data. So let's have a look, see if we can find the create. Maybe I've already missed it. User create, no. Here we go at the top here. So admin create. So this is our endpoint for creation. So this is where we need to send the data. We need to utilize post to do that. So we're going to post our data here. And this is what the parameters, this is what's expecting. So title, slug, author, excerpt, and content. So these are all required items. So if I wanted to post data to this endpoint, I need to make sure I post that data across. So title, slug, author, excerpt, and content. So notice here that I don't include the author because we're not quite ready to do that. So in actual fact, I've just hard coded that into this instance at this point. In a later tutorial, we're going to have a look at saving data within our project globally so we can pass data across, because what we're going to need to do here is that when the user logs in, we're going to need to collect some of their data. One of the things that we need to collect is the ID of the user so that we can utilize that to determine who actually is creating a post. but we're not quite there yet. So we're just going to manually add the ID in at this point. So we set up now a data store, and now we've got to now set out our container. So inside of our container this time, we're just creating a title, which is going to be create new post. And this time we've got a form. So again, this is just a copy and paste from I think the register form. I've just changed some of the different parameters here. So you need to make sure that you use the name title. That's important. And on change, we're going to then use the handle change function. So here, the ID, label, name, etc. That's just all title. I do the same thing again for another item here, which is going to be the excerpt. So again, I'm using a text field for that. And notice here, text fields can be defined by utilizing multi-line. So if I want to make a multi-line text field, I define multi-line and then how many rows I want to use. So I want to use 4 in this case. So I move across, and now I want to set out the slug. So this slug isn't a multi-line, so I haven't defined multi-line, but I am still using the handle change to handle any changes. So also notice that I get the value from the form data from our store. And this is how the value then appears inside of that input field. So next up, we have the content. And again, I've used a multi-line of 4 rows. And then finally, we got the submit. So on submit, we incite the handle submit. So we're going to connect to the handle submit function for that. And then we've got handle change to change anything inside of the input fields. So the handle change, remember, every time someone types in something into the input field, that will update our state. Okay, so that's pretty much how it's constructed. So let's have a look at the handle change. So this is the handle change. So we've got set up all the data here. Now we've got handle change. So I don't need that. So what we got here, I don't need that either. I just need to use that. Okay, so what we got here is that we handle the change. So every time somebody types in a key into any of our input forms, it's going to run this. So what's happening here is we're going to collect the target name, which is going to be the actual input that we're typing in. So if we're typing in something into the content field, that's going to be the target name, so content. And then we get the value. And all that's happening now is we're using update form data to actually insert the data in. So every time we type in something into the input form, this will be updated. Right. So that happens there. Now, the thing is, when we actually utilize, or when we type in something into the title, we also want to update the slug. So what we've done here is create an if statement that if the target name equals title, i.e. if we're typing something into the title, we're going to run this piece of code here, which is going to, first of all, add the item into the title item here. And then in addition to that, we're going to use slugify. So the slug, we're referencing this slug component here. We're going to add this data here. So we're going to wrap this around in the slugify function. And then we're going to go ahead and then get the value. That's the value that someone's typed into the title input. And then we're just going to slugify it. And then it's obviously going to appear in the state. And then obviously what we've done is we've added the value to the slug down here somewhere. And that's then going to display it in the input field. So that's what's going to happen there with this if statement. So we're just checking to make sure if we are typing into something into title, we're going to do something different. Now, if we're not typing in the title input field, then we're going to need to do this, which is just going to basically update the state with the corresponding field that we're updating. So that's pretty much what the handle change does. So have a look at it. If you've got any questions, then please just ask. Okay, so that's handle change. That's just updating the state. So now we need to submit. So this is going to handle the submit. So we utilize, we don't need that. So we're using Axios. So we bring in Axios and we're going to post. So remember, we're going to post this data to the admin create. So that's pointing at our Django endpoint, admin create, as we saw in the documentation. Remember, we don't use API because that's already been hard coded into Axios. So we've got admin and create. So what we're going to send? Well, we just got the form data. So we're going to send whatever's in the form data of the title and the slug. The author we're hard coding in, remember, for now. And then we've got the excerpt and the content. So that's what we're going to send across to this endpoint. And then it's going to be saved. So once that's completed, apologies, I'm not actually capturing any errors here. You can add that in. And then what I'm doing is I'm just going to use the history push, and that's going to make a redirect to the admin page. And there we go. So that's the flow. So we are simply just taking in the data from the form. We're putting that data into the state. When we're ready, we then press submit. Then the handle submit button or the handle submit function works by posting to this endpoint in Django. This is the data that we're going to send, and then we get forwarded across to the admin page, and that's creating a new post. So once you finish with that, this is what you're looking at here, the create new post. So you can see that when we type in something into post, you can see that our slug is being generated. This is what I was referring to. And you'll notice that when I use uppercases, it lowers it. There are some special characters you can use which gets changed. And then when I press space, you can see it's utilizing a dash. And this is making a slug that can be utilized in our browser here. Okay, so we've got the excerpt and then we've got the content. So let's just go ahead and build that. That takes us to the admin page. That's the redirect. And we can now see that we've got a new entry here in our posts. So that's the display and create. So now let's focus on edit. So remember, we've already set up the edit action in terms of it's going to take us to the /admin/edit, and then it's going to use the ID of the post to add that to the URL. So let's go ahead and do that. And that should take us to, in this case, post number 51, and it displays all the information. So let's have a look to see how that works. So we're going to build a new page, if you haven't already done so, called edit. Now we're just going to make sure that that is all hooked up. So you can see that edit takes in this parameter or collects the parameter, the number from the URL. And then we've got the import up here. So this is all in place. So let's discuss this. So here is the same situation again. Material UI is being brought in. We're using a little bit more functionality here, which I'll explain in a second, particularly use params. So let's go down here. We're utilizing the style as per normal or overrides, and then we've got the export. Okay, so we're using history again because we want to do a redirect. Remember, we're editing here. So once we finish editing, we'll redirect the user to the admin page. Now we want to collect that item from the URL. So remember in the index here, we reference edit and then this ID. So this reference point here is called ID. So we need to match that up with this edit item, with this item here. So it's extracting the number from the URL and it's putting it into a new variable called ID. So what I've got here stored now, in this case, is number 51. So that's what I'm storing, and that's how it's all connected. So now I've got that in place, I then set out as per normal what it is I want to change. Now let's go back into our blog documentation. If you're not too sure, if you've not seen this, then head over to that tutorial where I'll show you how to implement this into your Django RESTful framework. So we want to edit. So let's just go down. So we're using update, remember. So admin edit update. So it's admin edit. So let's just double check we're sending it to the right place. Admin edit and then post detail. Apologies, it's this one here, post admin edit. So I was just matching that up, just to make sure. So you can see here we've got edit in our documentation here. So API admin edit, and then we're going to take in the ID of the post. So you can see here what's required to make an update is the ID. So that's the only required field that I need to ensure that I'm utilizing. So we'll take that into consideration when we're building this. So let's first of all head down to the form. Now the form is going to be exactly the same as the create. So here we've got the container, the edit post in this case, and we've got our new form. And inside of here, we've got this item called title, and then excerpt, and then the slug. So this is pretty much a copy and paste from the previous page that we saw here, and is why I'm kind of just breezing over the pages like this, because everything is starting to become, or starting to look the same. So I've got two problems here, or two things I need to deal with. First of all, I need to deal with the handle change. So when someone types something in, and secondly, I need to handle submit. But one thing that I do need to do first is, if you remember, when we go to this page, all the data is there. It's already been filled in. So we need to do that first. So what we've done here is use the use effect here. Notice that we've gone to admin, edit, post detail, and then ID. So if you remember, the ID is being taken from the URL. So the ID has been taken from here, so 51. So what we're doing here is we're sending a request to Django, to this endpoint, edit, post detail, and then plus the ID. So if we go back into Django and go to our URLs for the log API, we're going to admin, edit, post details, and then we're sending across the number, the ID of the post. So that's being collected there by Django. So that's why we're doing that. So let's just go back into here. So we're sending across that. That can be captured by Django and then select the individual post. So what gets returned here is an individual post. And what we're doing here, when we return the data, I just make this explicit rather than making this as a loop. You can see that we're returning the data as res right here. And then we're going into the data and then we're selecting the individual item from the data. Now, obviously what we're returning is an individual post. So we can extract the individual pieces of data, and then we're just updating our state with that data. So now inside of the state here is our existing data, or the data that's been returned about that particular post. So what we can do now instead down here is we use value in every item. So the value of this text field to begin with is always going to be what's returned from the database. So we return the data from the database, put it into a state, and then we can display it right here. And that's why the data is being displayed right here in the edit page. So obviously what we can do is utilize on change to update the state. So that's how we're going to update the data. So I can override it at any point in time, and now we've updated the state. So what's happening here, we're retrieving data from Django, we're putting it into a state which we can change. It's mutable. So that means we can now add data here. Now the state has been updated. So now the state has been updated. We now just need to, when we press update post, send that new state to Django. And obviously that's going to make the override, or that's going to overwrite what is existing in the database on the Django side. So that's how we make the update. So let's go back into the handle submit. It's the same type of situation. We need to send it to the right place. So admin edit. So if we go back into our Django instance here in our URLs and our blog API, we're sending it to admin edit, and then we're also sending the ID. And then Django's just going to deal with updating that. So here, that's what we've done. We've added the ID. Now you need to remember the trailing slash. So in Django, if you've got a trailing slash, then you need to also include it. Oh, apologies. Okay, so that's why we've got that there. So what we're going to send across, we're going to send across the title of the slug, because that might have been updated. The author, again, is static, remember, just because we've not set that feature up yet. And then we're going to send the excerpt and content. There we go. So that's what we're going to do. Notice that we're not explicitly sending across the ID, because the ID is just going to be generated from the URL. Okay, so once we're done with that, we use history to push the user back to the admin, And here we're just using a small hack by refreshing the page. Now, if we don't refresh the page here, what's going to happen is that when you delete or edit something, it's not going to show straight away on the admin page. So window location reload is basically just going to force a reload and then show the action that's being completed. So let's have a go now. We should be able to edit this. So do a bit of that, update post, everything gets refreshed. You kind of notice that there was a little bit of a flick in there. One, because the page was loading the data, and two, there was a refresh. So you can see that we've got FFFF, and that's what we've just changed. So we can change that again, and so on. Okay, so that is the edit feature. Let's just show you, well, let's just break this. So if I go to the admin and then go to, this is where the data I'm meant to be collecting. So if I just type something there, so if I go back into my admin now, you'll notice that the admin says we are waiting for data to load. And that just matches up the post loading. We are waiting for data to be loaded. So remember that we're wrapping the posts inside the admin around, or the post loading is being wrapped around the posts here. So if we can't find the data, that's what's going to be displayed. So let's go back into the admin and just change that back. Okay, so we've got all our data here. So now we're going to focus on the deletion. So this is going to be a very similar process as you might imagine. So we're going to create a new page called delete. We're going to make sure that we've got, so a component, we're then going to make sure that we've got our delete, and we're going to utilize the ID again and pass that in. And we've got a new import there. So we're now going to delete. So you can set this up pretty much however you like. Maybe you don't want a feature whereby the user can just confirm they want to delete. Maybe you just want them to delete and forward them back. So here we're not going to be utilizing any of that. So we've got the instance, access instance. We're going to use history and params again, because we're going to need to extract the parameters. So first of all, we include the history feature, and then we get the ID from the URL. That's the number from the URL, so we know what post we're working with. And then you can see what's going to happen here. We've basically got a button. We've created a simple button. And all we're going to do is when someone clicks on it, it's just going to fire off the handle submit function. That's pretty much what's going to happen here. So the handle submit, you can see that we're utilizing delete this time. So we're sending a delete request. Something I didn't mention actually in the previous, in the edit. So remember we're using put here. So that's the key. So we're sending a put request, and this time that's for editing. And then for deletion, we're sending across a delete request. So we're sending it to the Django endpoint. We're using the ID again that's been generated, or it's been utilized from the URL here at the top. So we know what post we're working with. So we send that across. And then here I've just set up a simple catch because I haven't done it yet. So I thought I'd give you an example. And then I'm using this incorrectly then just to create a redirect. So I'm just redirecting. Once we've deleted, perform the action, we're just going to redirect the user to the admin page. And then like per normal, we're just going to refresh the page. Okay, so we force a refresh. So now what we've done is sent off a delete request to Django, and that should now be deleted. So let's go ahead, confirm and delete. That refreshes. We're back here in the admin and it's gone. And there we have it, a very simple update, create, update, or create, return, update, and delete. So I apologize the format if you didn't like the format here, where I'm just really just talking about the code rather than actually coding it out. There's a lot of elements here that are pretty much the same we've already covered. There were a few different features that we've utilized that we haven't utilized before. And I suppose there is a general expectation here that you've already seen the other tutorials and you're following along. Now the code is downloadable, so have a look at the code, go through the code. If you've got any questions, any queries, then please just ask. Thank you very much for watching. This was the Django DRF and React series, a simple CRUD with DRF and React front end. So notice we didn't really do too much on the front end, in all honesty, did we? We just added some endpoints, which we could easily slim down later on. So the idea is that I want to slim those down utilizing view sets and routers. So we'll have a look at that later. By all means, have a go yourself. Have a look at the tutorial on view sets and routers and try and do it yourself. Essentially, all we've done here is we've created a CRUD feature now for our application utilizing our Django backend. You've seen how we can exploit some of the class-based views in Django to easily, quickly build the functionality that we're going to need and the endpoints for us to then build a simple React application which takes advantage of those features. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thank you very much.